Hello. Hold on, guys. I'm going to wait 1 second. I'm not entirely sure if this is up and running yet. Everything's running a little bit slow. So, if this is running and if you guys are watching, hey, how you doing? Hope you're all having a good day. Today's topic is going to be about a question that was asked here last night or yesterday. Okay, now I can see that we're up and running. So, hey everyone, thanks for being here. Honored to be with you and to be of service as always. As you guys might be able to tell, I'm not in my usual space right now, so I'm going to keep today's video somewhat short. I'm not going to go into the in-depth explanations of everything that I usually do. I'm just going to try and give a few of the conceptual explanations and the step-by-step answers of all the things that we need to consider and deal with as we handle people that was being used qualifies as gaslighting. I very much felt the same. I don't necessarily think that the example that was used qualifies as gaslighting in those terms, but it doesn't really matter because that's not really the core of what we're dealing with there. We're dealing with how do we handle people that are treating us in this way, whether it's gaslighting or narcissistic behavior or just basic judgment and aggression and shame and guilt and all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to jump right into it. Like I said, I want to keep this one fairly short today. So the first thing that we need to do in order to handle this stuff, like as we're trying to do with all of what we're learning here, or from this point, defensive about this, if we get angry at the other person, if we would take revenge on them, any sort of negative response that we give to these other people is simply not helpful for us. It's not enjoyable, it's not productive, it doesn't feel good, and it is only going to lead to worse outcomes. There is absolutely no benefit to the way that we respond defensively and aggressively to people who treat us like this. Now, on the 3D level, in our old school sort of way of thinking, we have this habit of, we feel justified in getting angry, in getting revenge, because this person has done something wrong. This person has been cruel to me. This person is at fault. And while it is true at the 3D level that this other person is to blame, what good is it going to do to blame this person? It has no positive outcome for you, and it just helps to build this anger and this frustration and this judgment inside of you. So we have this habit of justifying our pain and justifying our anger. And, basically what I tell people all the time is like, yes, you're right. You are justified in feeling this way. But which would you rather do? Do you want to justify your pain or do you want to overcome it? The more that you justify your pain, think about what you're doing. You're literally telling yourself why it's okay for me to be angry, why it's okay for me to be upset, why it's okay for me to be frustrated or to take revenge at the moral level. And you're right, in the old school moral way of calculating things, this person has been cruel to you, and you are justified in feeling a certain way and in responding a certain way. But keep in mind that what we are dealing with throughout this whole healing process is unconditional self-love. And this response that you're choosing to take against this other person, when it's based in anger and frustration and whatever, these negative emotions, that goes against unconditional self-love. So um, the first thing that we need to understand at the intellectual level is that these negative responses aren't helpful for us. They don't feel good. They don't lead to good results. They are not productive. And what we are doing is we're telling our brain, both consciously and subconsciously, it is okay to be angry and to be frustrated. And again, yes, from the moral point of view, in terms of like old school ethics kind of thing, you are right. But do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? So you have this option of internalizing this, or taking this, letting it put you into that energy because you feel like you're justified for it, or choosing to overcome it. Now, choosing to overcome it is going to require a level of patience, compassion, and understanding for yourself and for this other person that we wouldn't have been able to muster in our old school mentality. Because when you're justifying your pain, when you're thinking in the terms of, how dare this person act that way, now it makes it right and acceptable and possibly even helpful for you to respond in this vengeful way. But as you start connecting more and more to energy and emotions and to what's going on inside, you're going to recognize that feeling inside of you, this anger that this person is bringing up, is something that you don't want. So, again, do you want to justify your pain or do you want to overcome it? Theoretically, you want to overcome it. You don't want to feel this pain. You don't want to feel that anger anymore. And if you keep on blaming the other person and judging, this situation based on morals and ethics, then yeah, you're going to keep yourself going in that circle. But when you shift from morals and ethics to energy and emotions, then you are going to choose to act in a different way, because you want to act based on what is best at the energetic and emotional level. And that is going to take priority. So this is very much in line with, what Nikola Tesla used to say. That's the way that we want to start doing this. We want to stop thinking in terms of morality and ethics and blah, blah, blah. And we want to start thinking more in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That's what's going on here. So we can either allow this person's negative behavior to bring up the... Whoops, sorry guys, I think just my video has been pausing. I don't have great internet connection here. So we can either allow this person's bad behavior to bring up these negative emotions inside of us, or we can choose to take control of it. Okay? There is no benefit to justifying our pain and to responding to people in this way. So that's step number one. Step number two on the psychology level is we need to understand... Wait. Hold on, guys. I'm going to move somewhere where hopefully I have better internet access, because I see that, the feed keeps cutting out. So give me 1 second. I'm going to go up, 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 up. I'm staying over at my parents' place for a couple of days because I've got rats. So, moving upstairs. Okay. So, that was step number one. We need to recognize and identify that this behavior, this justification of our pain, is simply not helpful. It's not enjoyable and doesn't feel good. Step number two is we need to understand what's happening in the other person at this point. Because if we keep on looking at this in terms of they are just a horrible person and they're being an asshole and how dare this person, blah, 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 it's going to make it very hard for us to then take control of our own emotions and deal with our own things. So we need to understand, this is something that I talk about a lot, that it relates to what I was just saying. Unconditional self-love requires that we don't allow, not allow, I don't like that word, but that we master our emotions to the extent that we don't act based on fear, based on anger, based on judgment. We don't want to keep acting that way. So, if that is true for us, that unconditional self love means not being cruel to other people, then what do you think it means about the other person? When they are gaslighting you, when they are judging you, when they are being aggressive to you, if they truly loved themselves in the way that we are working on loving ourselves, they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't be able to because it would cause them pain. So, what we need to recognize is that anyone who is treating you like this is themselves in a lot of pain and acting from that pain. Now, the frustrating sort of difference here is that we, as the sort of victim of the situation, we understand our pain. We know that we're in pain. We understand, what's happening here. Whereas the other people, they are so blocked off from their emotions and in so much pain that they can't see it. That's the difference. We understand our pain. They don't. They are so blocked off. They're so low in their vibrations that they don't even understand it. So when you can start to wrap your head around this fact that people who are being cruel to you are actually in more pain than you are, they're just actually in a form of pain that they're not able to recognize, then we can start to let go a little bit. We don't need to judge them and be aggressive in the same way. We can learn how to be compassionate for them, which doesn't mean that we roll over and let them do whatever we want, whatever they want. We're not going to accept negative behavior in our lives. But this is just one of the first steps where we need to recognize this. We need to recognize the source of this behavior, which is actually their own inner pain and their own fear-based defense mechanisms, and it's all a reaction to their own trauma. So those two things, that's basically stage one, is we want to intellectually recognize that our negative reaction isn't going to be helpful, and their negative behavior is actually a response to trauma. So there's no point in allowing ourselves to get angry, and there's no point in judging the other person for it. So now that we know that intellectually, what do we do? Okay, now that we know that we don't want to judge for our benefit and for theirs. Now we're starting to shift from the head into the heart. Okay, we need to learn how to actually feel what we're feeling in that moment. Now, that sounds like a pretty vague and esoteric thing that doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but as I teach people through my course, we're learning how to actually find the feeling inside of us. There's the three brains. There's the head, the heart, and the gut. Now, okay, that's being at least slightly metaphorical, even though science does recognize that those are actually kind of three brains. They each operate with their own kind of nervous systems. We're being slightly metaphorical. What we're talking about is your thoughts, your emotions, and your sensations. Those are the three elements of your experience of reality. Nothing that you experience can't be categorized as one of those things. Thoughts, feelings, and sensations. Everything falls into one of those categories. So we dealt, number one, with the thoughts. And the emotions, like I said, it seems like this esoteric, weird thing when I say, okay, we need to learn how to feel the emotions. The emotions that we're feeling always have a, I don't want to say physical, but I'll explain in a second, but a physical representation in your body somewhere. And in the course and a lot of what we're working with, we practice and we learn how to find the feeling. For example, anxiety tends to manifest as it's the cycling thoughts in your head, it's this intangible sense of fear or dread, and it's this turning feeling in the pit of your stomach. So that turning feeling in the pit of your stomach, that's what I'm talking about. That is the physical representation of an emotion. That turning feeling in the pit of your stomach is something that you physically feel. Now, sometimes I prefer to refer to it as an energetic sensation because it's not technically physical. It's not the type of thing that like you can shine an X-ray or an MRI on it and you're going to see, oh, look, there's the anxiety going around in circles. It's not literally physical. It's sensational, but it's something that you feel in your physical body. So what we need to do once we've dealt with the intellectual, basically what we've done there is we've recognized, okay, these thoughts that I'm having about judging this other person and about my justified anger and whatever, these thoughts are illusions and they're not helpful. Now that we know that, okay, let's put aside the thoughts for 1 second. Great. Once we have that, there's more to understand about the emotions that we're having. Like when you understand more and more and more how your emotions in that scenario, you're actually just being triggered. It's actually your old unresolved emotions that are being triggered, and what's happening in that momentary scenario isn't as real and as important as you think. Then we can put aside the emotions for one moment as well and focus on the last remaining thing, which is the sensation in your body. So you're going to be able to find that feeling inside of your body. And the more that we can actively put our attention onto that sensation without needing to run from it, without needing to judge it or paint a story around it or do anything other than actively feel it, the more that you're going to recognize that that's all it is. It's just an uncomfortable sensation. That's all there is to it. It's not something to be afraid of. It's not something to run from. It is the representation of old unresolved emotions running through you. And we usually shift to the brain, into this judgment, into all that, because we're trying to avoid feeling those uncomfortable sensations inside of us. But when you can actually turn your attention to that sensation directly, while putting aside the thoughts and putting aside the fear for just one moment, then you're going to recognize, like, oh, that's all it is. It's just a stomach ache. It's just a bit of discomfort. And if you can allow yourself to truly focus on it, then what's going to happen is that sensation is going to start moving through you. Think about it very much as a trapped emotion. That's why you're feeling that sensation inside of you, and it's trapped because you've never allowed it the freedom, the space, and the time to move. So, by putting aside our thoughts for a moment, and by putting aside our fear for a moment, and by actively focusing on what we're feeling, yes, it's going to be a little uncomfortable, especially at the beginning when you start learning these tools and building these muscles, but that's it. It's just uncomfortable. You know, when you have a stomach ache, you don't start freaking out about, oh my God, do I have stomach cancer? And is everything in my life horrible? And do all my friends hate me and all that sort of thing? You know, we don't spiral out of control when we have a stomach ache, but we do that with emotions. So when we have a stomach ache or a headache, we know enough to just be like, okay, well, I'm not feeling very well right now. And I'm going to sit down and I'm going to wait it out. You know, I know that in a few hours from now, I'm not going to be feeling this way. Or, you know, it might take a day, it might take two. We know that. But somehow we get very confused when it comes to emotions. So when any of this emotional and sensational discomfort starts coming up in us, we start freaking out and we shift into this defense mechanism. Now, think about this. If you did the same sort of thing when it came to a headache and a stomach ache, you would make it that much worse. If every time a stomach ache came up, you tried to justify your pain around and say like, oh, well, I'm justified in being in a shitty mood right now because I have a stomach ache, which means that you're going to treat people worse and they're going to, you know, they're not, I don't know, I'm not going to get too deep into this random example. But point being, the more that you know, allow yourself to settle into the pain, or like the less that you recognize that it's just a passing thing, the more you dig yourself into these scenarios. Okay. So by putting aside the thoughts and putting aside that fear or that anger for just one moment and actively focusing on that sensation inside of you, you allow it to move through you. And what's happening there is more than just you dealing with the scenario right now. What's happening when you manage to do that is actual healing. This is how we heal. All of this stuff from the past is finally moving through you. Because when this person is treating you this way right now, if you are already in a state of intense and full self-love, then that person's behavior wouldn't bother you anyway in this moment. If you were the Buddha in that moment kind of thing, it wouldn't bug you. You would already be at a level of emotional mastery that you could work through it. So it's not about what's happening right now. The real reason you're getting so frustrated and so upset and so defensive is actually because this person's behavior is triggering old pain inside of you. And by allowing yourself to focus on it directly, without more fear, without painting a new picture, you allow that to move through you, and you're actually healing stuff from your past. It's fantastic. This is how healing works. Okay? So, steps number 1, we need to intellectually understand what's going on both inside of us and in the other person. Step number 2, we need to learn how to feel our feelings without painting new pictures around it and allow us to heal ourselves. Now, until we do that, until we learn how to look inwards for a moment and how to, heal this stuff, basically any action that you take is going to be based in fear or anger or defensiveness or whatever. So no action that you take until you learn how to feel your feelings is going to be the appropriate solution that you're actually looking for. So we need to do that first. Once we start learning how to do the healing, now you're going to start achieving a level of emotional mastery where you can start taking more proper responses to these things. And these responses are basically going to be one of 2 things. And there are levels here of what you're willing to accept and what you're willing to deal with versus what you need to walk away from. So there are some people, someone was commenting on the thread where this was asked the other day. Someone was commenting that when she said in terms of, pray for them and send them love. Which again, I would use slightly different words, but absolutely true. That's exactly it. When you learn how to not get angry in yourself and how to treat this other person with love and compassion when they are being cruel to you, there's a genuine chance that they are going to change their attitude as well, because they are so used to being met with anger and fear and defensiveness. We have all been playing what I like to call the anger game. One person gives you anger, and that triggers the anger inside of you, and so you give them back more anger, and that triggers more anger inside of them, and they give it back to you, and you give it back to them, and around and around and around we go, building and building and building this anger, the same way that feedback works in a microphone. The sound from the speaker goes into the microphone. The sound from the microphone comes out of the speaker. The sound from the speaker goes back into the microphone, and over and over and over and over and over until we get that huge big sound of ee coming out of the speakers. That's what's happening. It's the same frequency being stacked on top of itself over and over and over. And that's what most people are doing. There's this anger frequency that you're carrying anger inside of you from the past. They're carrying anger inside of themselves from the past. None of you notice that. So he gets triggered into anger. He gives you his anger. His anger triggers all of that anger inside of you. So you get more angry and you trigger him and he triggers you, and around and around and around we go. But all it takes sometimes is for just one person to stop playing that game. So some people are supremely deep in their anger that it's not going to change them, and I'll talk about that in a second. But some people are just defensive, and they almost consciously know it, but just not quite. So they are only getting angry and defensive in that moment because they're used to everyone else in their life responding with fear and anger and defensiveness. They have never, maybe not never, but they have never met a person who is able to remain compassionate and calm and kind while they are getting upset. And in a moment when they notice that they are getting upset at someone who is remaining calm and compassionate, at some level, they might actually be able to stop and recognize, wait a minute, I don't need to be defensive right now. I don't need to be angry. Here's this person who is being patient and calm and listening, which means that I can relax. I can be patient and calm and listen. So they're getting defensive because they're expecting you to be defensive and angry as well, the same way that everyone else in their life has been. But when you act differently, you give them the option. They might choose to act differently as well. So there is one group of people who, once you manage to master your emotions a little bit, by treating them differently, they will change their attitude as well. And this is, by the way, how, one by one, we change the whole world. This is why you don't actually need to focus on being of service, for example, the way that I do, of teaching people, of guiding people. All that you need to do to change the world is change how you react. Because when you stop acting out of anger, you might be that one person in someone else's life that allows them that moment of, whew, oh my God, I can breathe, I can relax, I can express myself. So that's option number one. You choose to act lovingly and compassionately, and that's going to allow them the space to react lovingly and compassionately to you, or at least, to start opening up. So it's going to open up the doors to progress, both for you and for that other person. So that's option number one. You might change all the dynamics of your relationship with this person, or at least in that moment. Option number two is they're not. There are some people, a lot of people, who aren't there yet. They are so programmed and so dug into their fears and their traumas that no matter how calm and patient you get, they're not going to be able to get there. And there are actually some people who, I'm sure many of you have experienced this, where if you stay calm, it's actually going to piss them off even more, because they are used to playing this anger game. And when you don't give them the response that they are expecting, it's very frustrating to them. It's supremely annoying when you are getting angry at someone and they are staying completely calm. These people that are still very stuck in their anger and their fear and their defensiveness will take it as an insult. Like, I'm giving you anger right now. You are supposed to be getting offended. Why aren't you getting offended? They take it as like you stealing their power kind of thing. They're used to maintaining control through their negative behavior. And when you don't give in to their negative behavior, it's going to piss them off even more, because they don't know how to deal with you now, and they're going to judge you or gaslight you or be aggressive to you even more to try and drag you into this anger game. And sometimes that's actually happening from people that love us or that we love, because that's the only way they know how to interact. They don't know any other way. So when you choose to act from a place of love and calm compassion, they're either going to shift into your energy, or they're going to push you away even more and get even more angry and even more frustrated. In those scenarios, that's when we need to learn how to walk away. But do keep in mind that we need to learn to walk away in a loving and compassionate way. When we say to ourselves, oh yeah, well, fuck that other person, they don't deserve, like, they're just being angry and fuck them. You have to realize that statement in and of yourself, that's carrying the energy and the frequency of anger and fear and judgment, and that's something that you don't want to cultivate in yourself. This is all based on self-love. That is the goal. That is what we're working on here. So we choose to understand ourselves and feel compassion for the other person because of self-love. We don't want to cultivate these negative things inside of us anymore. And we choose to respond to someone who's being cruel to us in a loving and compassionate way for our benefit, not for theirs. And if they still choose to continue with their negative and judgmental and aggressive behavior, that's when we need to lovingly and compassionately and without judgment and without anger remove ourselves from the situation. And someone was asking, what about with family? Yes, even with family. Now, there is a period during our awakening, and I went through this myself, when we are trying to change ourselves and those around us can't necessarily get it, and it becomes very hard for us to interact with them. I had a period during my awakening where it was very hard for me to interact with my family, and what I realized in the long run was that it wasn't really about them. It was about me trying to understand myself, because the more that I came to understand myself, the less that I needed validation from them. So when it comes to family and this kind of thing, just know that there might be times while you go through your healing where you need to separate yourself from certain people that are triggering you so that you can get a hold of yourself. But if you do it properly in the right way and without judgment and anger, then the door is always open. So the goal is always just to choose self-love. That's it. And when you choose self-love and you do it in a positive and compassionate way, then you don't need to attack the other person, blame the other person, and create this great divide between you guys. And that's what kind of happened with me. I created some space from people that were triggering me at the time. And then the more mastery that I gained about myself, the easier it became to, get back into those scenarios. And by doing that, I feel like I also then had an impact on the whole dynamic of the situation. So just know that, yes, whoever it is, like this journey is about self love. And sometimes, even with family, we need to create space. Um, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. So it's all about self-love. That's it. So just to recognize more and more and more how you responding defensively and aggressively will go against self-love. How them treating you in this way is them going against their own self-love. They're in pain. They're frustrated. It's not helpful to them. And if you walk away judging them and angry at them and yelling at them, then that goes against self-love for you. So our goal is just to do what is best for us at the energetic and emotional level. And when you learn how to do that calmly and patiently and to walk away from people who are being cruel to you in that loving sort of way, then everything's going to work out. You will create that space, and basically you give the other person the choice a little bit. You're going to put up boundaries against behavior that doesn't serve you, and that allows the other person to decide for themselves which side of that boundary do they want to be on. Are they going to continue attacking you because they're not willing to respect your boundary? Or are they going to recognize in that moment, like, oh, well, firstly, here's that boundary that they're putting up. And secondly, oh, they're being kind and calm and compassionate, and I don't need to react in this old way. And when you do that, it might switch. But if they don't, then you walk away compassionately and you do it in a way that there's no blame, there's no anger. And if it comes up later, you can reunite with them, or you can test the waters and see. Okay? So that's about it. This went longer than I was expecting. I started off by saying, hey, I wanted to keep this short, and here we are half an hour later. I have that habit. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope this has been helpful. If you found this helpful, you absolutely should be checking out my book, Feelings First Shadow Work. I'll put a link in the comments below, because this is all stuff that I talk about in there. This is all, and I give the whole explanation of how this is happening inside of us and inside of the other person. And I give the whole 8-step process that I use with my clients of how to conquer this stuff, how to move from the head to the heart and all that sort of stuff. So I'll put a link in the comments. Thank you so much for being here. Alicia, great to have you. It's always great to have a couple of actual live viewers, and I'm so glad that this was helpful for you. Thanks so much, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.